Well, I have good news for you today. The good news today comes from the Torah. We're starting a 5-part series entitled Tales from the Torah. And today we're looking at good news when life is the pits. Tales from the Torah. What does the Torah mean? What is the Torah? Well, the word Torah actually means instruction or law. And the Torah sometimes is referred to as the Pentateuch. And Pentateuch, like penta, like a pentagon is a 5-sided building. The Pentateuch is a group of 5 books, the books of the law. So it's generally talking about Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the books of Moses. So the books of Moses are generally referred to as the Torah or the Pentateuch. So in this series, we're looking at the books of Moses. And today in particular, we are looking at the book of Genesis. And what I'm doing is picking out one story out of each of the books, perhaps my favorite story, let me put it that way, and I'm going to share it with you. So today, we're looking at Tales from the Torah, good news when life is the pits. A year ago, we were just beginning a new year, and we can kind of look back over the year 2009 and ask ourselves the question, what kind of year was 2009? It started out with fanfare, a lot of hoopla, and great expectations, but what kind of year was 2009. I can share with you what kind of year it was for me. And of course, it may be better or worse for you. For me, 2009 was, it was kind of the pits in a lot of ways. First of all, I had a 49-year-old cousin who died of ovarian cancer. I think most of you know, but perhaps not all of you know, that I am an only child, and so my cousins are very close to me because of the fact that I was an only child. They're more like brothers or sisters. And my cousin Linda died, and she died a pretty awful death. She suffered for months in the last part of her life. And she died not that long ago. And then in 2009, some very good friends of ours, members of my former church in Virginia, their 29-year-old daughter died in an automobile accident. And I went back to Virginia to conduct that funeral. It was very hard. It was really the pits. And then, unbelievably, several of my colleagues here in Southern California died. Ministerial colleagues died of illness or accidents. And I learned just a couple of days ago of another colleague that died. The pastor of the Roanoke church that I pastored before I moved here, the previous pastor to myself in Roanoke, he just passed away. And so death has been ever present. But not only death, I discovered that a former roommate at seminary, a ministerial colleague, a guy who was in my wedding and I was in his wedding. His name was Ken also. And he is now on medical retirement. He has a medical condition that doesn't allow him to work. It's a very, very sad story. I won't go into all the details, but his situation is pretty serious and it's pretty sad. Here at Orange Coast Church, we had 2 members in 2009 that were diagnosed with life-threatening cancer. That's 2 that I know about. There may be others of you, but at least 2. 2009 was the pits. For us personally, in my family, Barbara was out of work for 5 months, and that created a little bit of a financial hardship. Maybe I shouldn't be quite so generous. It created a big financial hardship. Life was the pits. And then, like many of you, in 2009, especially the first part of 2009, I lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in equity and value of individual retirement accounts. Life really can be the pits. And then early on in 2009, we had to revise our budget at Orange Coast Church because we could tell that the giving was not going to be what it had been the previous year. And it turns out it wasn't quite as bad as we thought it was going to be, but we were still down about $28,000 from the previous year. And our expenses actually went up with the new office. So 2009 really was the pits in a lot of ways. In one way, it was better than 2008 for me because in 2008, many of you know, I suffered a stroke. In 2009, I didn't, so it was better in that way. But we look forward to 2010 being even better. But life was not only the pits in 2009 for me, it was the pits for many of you. And it was the pits for others. And it was the pits not only for those of us who are in this generation, but if you look back in the Bible times, life was the pits not only in meaning that it was, disastrous or it was troublesome, but in some cases, literally, it was the pits. And there's this guy by the name of Joseph in the book of Genesis. This is one of my favorite stories. And Joseph, his life was the pits. And he was actually thrown into a pit. Let me share with you this text. Now Israel, that's another name for Jacob, loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. Now the first thing I want to say about this text is parents, don't ever love one child more than another. It just causes all kinds of problems. And I remember, I have 3 daughters, and ever since they were little, we've always been very careful, especially at Christmas time, to make sure they all had equal value of their gifts. And being children, when they were little, they didn't understand necessarily value, but what they understood was presents. And so if one child had 3 or 4 presents, then another child maybe only had 1 present. But the value was the same. But they didn't understand that. And so the child that got 1 present thought they were getting gypped. And they said, life isn't fair. And I took that as a learning or a teaching opportunity for me, a learning opportunity for them. And I agreed with them, and I said, you're right. A lot of times life isn't fair. You might as well get used to it because that's the way it is.